got another metal container here, and while this heats up, I'm going to put some of the soy wax that will help us keep the brushes clean and liquid into this other container. And that's going to be, think of it as a vat of turpentine, or if you're a watercolorist, it's going to be the water or the polymer. And so it's just loose crystals, and it'll just take a second to heat up. Now this is the first real fun we have, and this is interesting. So I'm going to put the metal tool back on the thermostat so it starts to warm up. But I want you to see, I don't know if you can, I'll move the thermometer, but it's messy. It's, you know, it's got wax on it. So if you can see this, the idea of the rag is that we can keep our work surface clean because it's hot. And I'm just going to wipe that excess wax right off that surface and then put the tool back. And that lets this surface stay warm, it lets my tool stay warm, and it lets everything stay. It's unique in that way. It's very easy cleanup. I'm going to take some of the wax. This is just the encaustic medium now. And I'm going to pour it, holding back that glob of unsealed stuff right on the surface. And then I'll let the rest of this sit up here and heat. And then while it's still semi-wet, I'm going to come back and try to cover the area. So it's cooling very quickly. That's so neat. Okay, now this is what I've got here is a cooled surface with color underneath, and I'm going to brush some color back on top of this surface now. So that means I want to mix up the colors I'm going to use, and I'm going to dip them right into my palette. And I'm going to get this brush over here. I'm going to brush it right back on top of this wax. And look how much more fluidly this goes on top of the wax. Now that I've got it covered once, it really starts to go on a lot quicker and easier than it did before. So I'm going to drop in this dark area here. I'm going to let that be kind of a reflection on this side. Come across here. And my goal right now is not to really do anything on a permanent basis. I'm just trying to get enough wax on the surface and get the area covered so it can be manipulatable. To that end, I'm going to keep this here to keep the brushes fluid. I'm going to just dip them in there. Again, it's not intended to spread as a material. I'm just using it to keep the surface fluid. I will take my warm tool and I'll start to lift some of this up and reapply it. And this is an interesting process here. And this is, so if you can see what I'm doing, I'm going to angle this so you can see it a little better. And the process involved here is fascinating because you're actually moving, and I'm cutting down to reveal some of the paint that's there and lift off some of the paint that's not. And I can reapply this in different spots across here. So let's say I want to create this surface of this boat and using that red paint. I'll want to have different tools to enable me to do that. So I may come back first and just use the hot plate to come back and simulate this and let me draw some of this red paint across that surface. And so I'm drawing in that surface when it's there. I'm going to come back on top and clean off my surface again because that's an important part of the process. I'm going to come back on top of that, grab a little bit of cold wax on this side. A little too warm, I'm going to have to check that thermostat. Pour that down over here. And this is where the fun begins. This is a much broader brush now. And look, once I've gotten that covered with wax, I'm really able to coat this surface really nicely. That's great. Now I'm going to need a dark in order to see these lights, and I want this whole side of the piece to be dark. So I'm going to look for this Egyptian violet. See what color that is. That means I'm going to heat my tool up, cut through this like a knife through butter. Let's get that nice and warm. I'm going to put some of that pretty King's Blue right on top. Yeah, do you see this smoking? Can you see that? It's smoking a little bit. I've got the heat up too high. I'm going to cut that back a bit because it's smoking and that's at a danger point. So I'm going to check the thermostat, and I took that off a little bit. The thermostat says the right temperature, but I don't trust it. If it's smoking, it's too hot. So I'm going to cut that off or cool it down. And now this is another area that is so much fun and so unique. And this is a way of moving this cooled stuff across. This is a heat gun, and I have several different versions of it we'll try. This is my main one, and it's got both a hot and a cold position, and it's got a high and a low position. So I'm going to turn it on hot, and I'm going to turn it on low. And I want you to see what happens to the surface here as it begins to heat up. And this is not like a hair dryer. You'll actually see this element begin to glow red. And that glowing red, look, if you can see how that manipulates the surface, that's what I'm looking for there. So if I'm able to re-emulsify this wax and spread it and move it while it's warm. And my goal here is to do two things. I want to cover this gessoed surface with enough wax so I can manipulate the surface. And at the same time, I want to pull down some colors. I want to have some color to the wax. So I'm letting the emulsified medium begin to move. And that's allowing me to start to cover the surface of the wax. Now it's a little difficult to see, so what I'm going to do is, again, the beauty of this is a very workable surface, so I'm going to let this sit. I'm going to switch guns. Now this is a very hot end. This is glowing red. So you can't set this on the wood or on a carpet. I've got a special table I'll set it on right over here, and it's got, actually I've got a concrete floor, so I'll set it over here, make sure it's not touching any of the electric cables. And I'll try another gun and see if it blows less. It also has two speeds, a low and a high. And I'll see if this noise is bothersome. Oh, it's got all kinds of heat controls on the back. So it's got some nice heat controls here, and this is the blower control. This is a nice gun. This is RNF provides this. I'm going to see, it doesn't quite get the heat, the speed that I like. See if I can get it hotter. Yeah, it's got the temperature though. I don't know if you can see this. I'm going to turn this off so you can hear me. Set it back down. But this is the uniqueness to the encaustic material, this milky look that doesn't allow for, that gives you a sense of you're really not sure where the surface is. Like, if I touch, you're not sure when you're going to come in contact with the surface. And to that end, it's really a beautiful thing. So in order to play with that, you give yourself a surface, and this is just that hot wax that I've melted down, and I'm beginning to use this in a much more familiar way. But once it's there, I can't move it. It's staying and cooling. I'm just using it to block in my areas. I want to have these big dark areas here, letting the brush absorb the paint and pull it across. Look how quickly that cools. I want you to take a look at this while I apply this. That's that surface. It's already cooling as it gets across here, and it just provides this beautiful surface that, depending on what's underneath, I can play with or manipulate. So as that cools, and I can put another color right on top of it. Well, that's got a little mixture in there. Sorry, I'll try that again. Cool that off. Okay. I can put another color right on top, and it won't mix because it's already a different temperature. So the warmer wax will melt and mix with the cooler wax, but if I can keep the cooler wax lightly applied on top, I'm able to come across. And much like the Impressionists did, we're lightening up the blue by letting these colors pop next to one another rather than be so solidly the same color across. And I'll block this in. And my goal here today, right now, is to cover this area. And you can see there's a lot of different surface texture that's going on. And I'm going to want to fuse that. And that's a fancy word for get it all back to a similar surface so that I can play with that surface again. And so I'm going to try to fuse this once. and just see what happens. And again, I'm going to stick the brush back into this wax. That's the wax that'll keep it wet. I'm going to play with some of these tools just to see what happens. And then you can see that this is already cool enough so that these tools make no difference in the surface. But if I take my gun and heat it up, I'll work on one area here. You can see it instantly start to get liquid. And then the pressure, the blowing pressure is what I can feel. That's a high blow, that's a low blow. I'm looking to move this surface around and blend it. There's a nice big ridge here, so I'll soften that ridge. Move it around. Another big ridge here. And you see how pretty these colors look when they're liquid, and how when it cools off, they sort of soften to a matte finish. At the end of the painting process, we can actually polish this back up. It's called burnishing, and you can polish it to get right back to that surface. I'll be right back.